Today is July 15th, 2006. My name is Joan Weston. This is the Holiday Inn, Zanesville, Ohio. The purpose of this interview is the African American presence in the Ohio River Valley Oral History Project. We will be speaking to Peter Byrd. Peter, please tell me your full name, and will you spell it, please?
I'm Peter Wesley Byrd, Peterwesley-Byrd.
Your date of birth and the place in which you were born.
June 15th, 1955 in Hudson County, New Jersey, Jersey City.
Can you tell me the names of your parents and where they were born?
My mother is Joyce Hilton Bransford, and she was born January 12th, 1932 in Harford County, Maryland. Have the grace. And my father's Earl Wesley Byrd, and he's May 24th, 1930, Hackensack, New Jersey, which is Bergen County.
And let's start with your grandparents on your mother's side, their names, and if you know their dates of birth.
Yeah, she's my mother's mother is Aurora Vernita Dingus, and she's April 3rd, 1910, born in Langston, Oklahoma, where her parents taught. And her father is Hugh Lawson Bransford. He was September 9th, 1907, born in Boston.
And on your father's side?
My father's parents were John Henry Byrd Sr., but he changed his name to Gordon Henry Byrd. He was born June 17th, 1888 in Somerset County, Maryland, Crisfield, Maryland, on the Delmarva Peninsula. And my father's mother was Sarah Lena Stewart, and she was born February 25th, 1894 in Whitehall Station, Augusta County, Virginia.
Siblings?
My siblings,
Your siblings?
are Joel Allen Byrd, 12/21/53. I'm Peter, the second of five. My brother Daniel Warren, who is 8/18/58. My sister Evelyn Joetta, who is 10/9/62. And my brother Matthew, who is 9/6/63.
Marriages, your own?
I was married to Deborah Lynn Miller. She's January 10th, 1955, born in Jersey City, New Jersey also. And we were high school sweethearts from 1971. We married in March 3rd of 79 in Jersey City. And we have sons, Wesley Christopher, who is July 3rd, 1982, born at Howard Hospital and in DC, and his brother Winston Daniel, who was May 29th, 1984.
Let's start with schooling. That is elementary school, middle school or junior high, high school, and college. So you will start school kindergarten, and you will start where?
I started at PS 24 in Jersey City in Hudson County in 1960, and went there 1 year, and then to 14 school on Oak Street in Jersey City where my father went. And in the third grade, my parents built a house on the north end of the peninsula that Jersey City's on, and they were building a school as they were building the house. And so we went to PS 40 with the biggest, newest pool, the finest building and courtyard until 8th grade, finished in 69, and then went to Snyder High School, Henry Snyder High School, on Bergen Avenue, and finished there in 73. And that's when I went to Fisk in Nashville, and I was on sort of an extended plan where I flunked out in my third year and went to Jersey City State, where my father was president of the board, trustees. I got in there rather easily. And then went back to Fisk for another year and a half. I did not achieve a degree, but I sang with Jubilee Singers for the entire time I was there. So we traveled and we met a lot of people, had a lot of access. And I enjoyed it because I had my grandfather's cousins, uncles, and aunts. Several of them went to Fisk, Tennessee State, Fisk, Roger Williams, which is defunct, Central College, which is now Lemoyne Owen in Memphis. So I was glad to be there.
Were the schools that you attended, high school, middle school, elementary, middle school, or junior high, high school, were they, well, you will go from kindergarten to the 8th grade in one school?
3 schools, kindergarten in 24, first and second in 14, and 3rd to 8th at 40.
Okay. And were these integrated schools?
The first 24 was mostly white. There were very few. I only remember seeing 3 or 4 other black kids there, other than the older kids who walked us to school. And then 14 was black. There was some, and now that I realize there were no white teachers. They were, it was an all-black school, but it didn't feel any different. I mean, I lived in an all-black household, so it was regular for me. And then 40 school was I was there in 63. It was sort of an experiment in integration. They called it open enrollment. And so they gave, since there were 5 bus lines that passed the school, they gave bus tickets to the students from the black areas. And there was a 5-building, 13-story each of poor white people. But it was a nice place. It wasn't projects as we think of them. And so that was for them. That school was for them basically, but there were lots of blacks among the students. So they were all integrated. And the high school where I went, at the time I was there, was probably 30% white, 30% black, maybe 20% Hispanic, and about 20% Jewish. And I say that because they were very Jewish. They lived in a community below the school, and we had a lot of fun together, but it was sort of the advent of the peace, love, dove 60s. And we had a good time. Music included everyone, sports included everyone. And we liked each other. We had a good time there, yeah.
When you will leave college, will you, tell me a little bit about your employment.
I was hired out of school. I was a class behind of where I belonged. And we had come back in May of 78 from a Jubilee Singer tour. And Delta and other companies were interviewing. And someone suggested I go over. She probably looked at my transcripts and realized, you should probably get a job. But the eventuality was that they hired me. I interviewed with Pan Am and with Delta. And just a quick digression, where I lived in Jersey City was, if you've ever been to Newark Airport, there's a bridge that goes from Jersey. The Statue of Liberty is 3 miles behind you. Manhattan is 7 miles behind you. And then there's a long bridge over the Newark Bay, the Hackensack River. I think it's the Newark Bay. And then Newark Airport is right there. In 1962, 3, 4, and 5, when jets were still very noisy and flew very low and there were still propeller planes, your plate started shaking when the plane was 7 miles away. And I would sit on the steps and really imagine, I got to get up on one of them. I got to get off this porch, out of this city, away from this family, and up on one of those planes. And so they hired me, and it was really something I think I prayed up. And I moved. They hired me to go to reservations in Washington. And they flew me to Atlanta for an interview and then flew me to DC for an interview. And at that point, I was already hired, but I was really in heaven because now I knew I would have access, and that's what I was going to school for. That's what I was educated for, just to be able to be part of the world. And so the plan was working. And I worked for Delta from June 78 until June 88, and really went everywhere I could go. Africa, went to Africa and Asia and South America and Stockholm and Russia and the Mediterranean and Canada. And I just loved being out because when I was out of the country, I was a regular person. I was not a nigger, I was not a nigger elsewhere. And there was something about the way the world received you, because they know that if you can get here this way and you're not in the army or playing basketball, then you have achieved a certain level. And the other really funny, surprising thing I learned was that when I'm out of the country, I'm an American the same as a 20-year-old blonde girl or a 70-year-old man from Montana. We're at the counter in Rome asking for the same thing. We're checking in our rooms in Brazil looking for the same thing. And that was new. That was new.
So the 88 will be the...
I left Delta because Delta was a company that, like many, that just had no information on how to work with a black person, and it wasn't part of their bottom line to understand that. So you, like in many situations, you just become whatever you need to be for the time you're there. And it became very stressful toward the end. And there were some things that were happening that began to separate me from what they give everyone and what I was getting, and I just couldn't swallow it. And I told myself in the beginning, I'll work here 10 years because this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life, and it ended up being that fortuitously. There were 170 something people in our office. There were 3 black guys. There were 400 plus in the Dallas office. There was 1 black guy. Their Board of Trustees annual meeting was in Monroe, Louisiana still. And when the marketing manager for DC in 78 came to meet our new class of hirees, he said, "I heard you sing, Byrd. Wow, can you sing Old Man River for me?" I mean, and his face was like red like a beet, and the straw boater and the seersucker suit. And I just told him, "I've heard of it, but I can probably follow you if you want to sing it with me." And then later found out when I was stuck at the airport in Baltimore from a 5-hour delayed flight with no transportation from BWI to DC, he took me home to my house, which was an hour out of his way. So I enjoyed it there. I enjoyed it there a lot. So I left in 88. And I went to Gulf Air they were based in Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. I worked in the New York office. They flew a double-titled flight from New York to London, and then you would continue to Dubai and Sharjah and connections to India and Africa. But the very interesting thing of that was that I worked for a family called the Minwalas. They were cousins to Benazir Bhutto, and one of the sisters was married to Jamshid Marker, who was the ambassador from Pakistan, and they were at the mission at the UN. So they were all connected that way, and they were Parsis who I had not been previously familiar with. They were the Zoroastrians, the first single God worshippers, fire. They were Zoroastrians who were driven out of Persia when Muhammad showed up. And so they moved to the Gulf spots of the Indian continent, Eurasia, and Karachi, Bombay, Goa, those places. But they were also the people who the British gave power to in India when it was colonized, because they looked most like white people. So they were intermarrying. They were 500 million 5,000 years ago, but they are now 500,000 worldwide. And it was just very interesting. But they also treated me not like a black guy, but like an American, which is weird. Which is weird.
Can you say a little bit about what might be the difference between being a black guy?
Being a black guy is being afraid from you and hesitant to say anything, and always wanting to slap five and acting as though dynamite was something that any black person really ever said, although it was written by a white guy. It was like going to Japan in the 80s after Toyota began to have a stronghold here in the auto industry, because they were making fine cars that didn't fall apart and gave you great gas mileage and a tight, manageable drive. And I guess, this is editorial, I guess racist comments by the Japanese ministers, one of them saying that Mexicans and Black Americans reduce the national average of education because we're all so dumb. Now, why is the president, it was the older Bush, releasing that so that black people wouldn't buy Toyotas? They'll keep buying big stupid Chryslers and go broke buying gas. But when I went to Japan that year, it was the finest I'd ever been treated in my life. And so it was these sorts of things that I was really conscious of and thankful to be aware of by traveling around. And so in '88, I worked for them for maybe 2 years in New York. I had a hard time with addictions during that period. And it was the beginning of a lot of discovery, which addictions led you toward, because there's a choice: I'll follow this down or I'll close my eyes and jump up. And I had a lot of support. But I came back to DC and worked for Pan Am until they went out of business. And then worked for United for several years out of Dulles, and continued to travel, but also work on myself. And
in that period of discovery, opening up, how did Ohio figure into it? Or when did you come to see that this is a place in which you want to?
I was infected with HIV in about '88. I was diagnosed in '90, but knowing what the symptoms are, I realized that I presented with them prior to diagnosis. And at that time, when people were diagnosed, you just died. You didn't see them for a few months, and then when you did see them, it was at a memorial service. And it was when, people said that, they should be dead, that's their punishment, and the president wouldn't speak the word, Reagan wouldn't speak the word, and funeral homes would not pick up your body, your families wouldn't come and see to your needs. They would come after you were dead and take your valuables and just leave your junk. Or it was just a real scary period. And so to be diagnosed, I probably lived in kind of denial a couple of years. The forward fast is I was well for a long time, but very scared and not understanding why I wasn't dead when everyone around me dropped. Then the face of the disease changed from gay white male to IDU, intravenous drug users, black male drug users. Females are being diagnosed when they're going to deliver a child. And then about '99, I fell out. I had wasted, I weigh about 300 pounds now. I had been down to maybe 170. I had chronic diarrhea and my skin was bared back, like the skeletal look that people used to have. And I went to the hospital to die, and they fixed me, and 6 days later they sent me out with 60 pills a day. And I gained access to health services and that sort of thing. But again, not thinking I would have any real life. This was about 6 years ago. Thinking that I might survive it, but not have a real life. They gave me 30 days to live, and I convalesced at my mom's house, and then started getting help and services from the health department in Maryland. They, seeing that I was able to write and read pretty well and understand, they connected me to the planning council in Baltimore to represent on different levels. And then I started doing consulting work and site visits and grant reviews, and I continued to get healthier. I got growth hormones, and so when I was wasting, I could eat a fried chicken and a cheesecake and still lose 5 pounds. But with the growth hormones, I gained like 300 pounds a day. And I ended up working and moving into another place, and shortly after buying a house and doing presentations and contributing to publications, presentations nationally. And the paradox is that it has ended up being the vehicle that gave me the life that I could never have when I was healthy. And so as I realize I probably will not have, I've been infected about 19 years, and I doubt if I'll have another 19 years, although I don't dismiss the possibility. I was thinking of what I would leave my sons. And my grandmother, my mom's mother, Aurora Dingus Bransford, died at 91 in 2001. And although I appreciated her information and how much of it she shared, and when I was dying, she was dying, so we, like in the gallows, shared. And I realized with her dead, I'd really need to start collecting some of these things so that everyone can have everything, but specifically my sons, my black sons, for whom they're building jails and for-profit prisons and not schools, something to help them know who they are, because they were not there when aunts were telling me this and cousins were sharing that and great-grands were showing me this. And so I started researching, and after about 4 months, I found links that could help you identify, other than ancestry, but help you identify names or families. And I found my 4th great-grandmother's maiden name. We had her photograph, but we didn't know her maiden name, we didn't know her first name, but we knew her daughter's name. And it was a RootsWeb site, and it offers a family tree option. And I put in Henrietta Guy, and it gave me Ann Calliman, her mother, and it gave me Amos C. Guy, her father. It gave me his 9 siblings. It gave me her 6 siblings. It gave me their grandparents' names and birth dates and siblings, and it was like a flood. It was like a deluge. And so then I was connected with Ohio. I knew that my great-grandmother was born at the Lett Settlement, but we didn't know that's what it would call. We knew her mother was a teacher, and while pregnant, she came to open a school from Missouri, and she was born here, but we didn't know that this is where the mother had been born, and her mother and her mother. So it was amazing also because my mother was born in Maryland, and her mother lived there from the time she was 22. My father's people are from Somerset County, Maryland. My maternal grandfather's people have been in Harford County, Maryland since 1780. And now to find out that my relatives from Missouri and Oklahoma started out in Maryland, and then went to Ohio and Missouri and Oklahoma and then back to Maryland. It was too much. It was too much.
What year would that have been? When you...
The movement, or when I found out?
When you found out.
This was 11 months ago. This was 11 months ago. And so they left Maryland about 1820, maybe 1830, because there were families there first, but they went about 1820, 39 families from Maryland because of the change of the racial tide, and they knew they could do better. And several of them had fought in the Revolutionary War, so they had land grant options. They settled these two counties, and then in 1850, a group went up to Michigan to option land grants and to also extend the Underground Railroad to Canada. And then when slavery was abolished, which they anticipated it eventually would, those people came down and helped to settle these towns. 1870, another group left Ohio and went to Missouri, and my third greats were among them, Henrietta Guy and James G. Brown. First cousins because Amos, Henrietta's father, and Lydia, his sister, was James Brown. So my third greats are first cousins, which makes my mother my fifth cousin, and my kids my sixth cousin, and every relation then doubled. But to Missouri in 1870, where they went to Lincoln, and they were family friends of Emmett Page, who was the first black graduate from Brown, and he settled Lincoln Institute. And then at the turn of the century, they went to Langston, Oklahoma. And then my grandmother went to Hampton in 1925. And after that, she taught in El Paso for about a year and then came to Maryland. So it was just amazing.
When you look at the photographs of family members and you see the rainbow, did you realize before you opened up this
Pandora's box? You can say it, it's okay.
that the rainbow was
Well, a couple things were sort of resolved because my grandmother looks like Queen Victoria, like 4'10", this giant bust, and these long braids up here. And she looks like a white woman. And the older she got, the whiter she got, because circulation being what it is. But all of these women looked like that. The guys were more thin, but the Calamans looked like Queen Victoria, all of them. And to see who my grandmother looks like for real, that was amazing. Also, the Calamans have this skin color that it's like a fair skin, but it's like a translucent brown stain over it. So it's still light, but it's still clearly brown. They have that. My mother has it, and her mother had it. But I think perhaps from the mixed race, marrying the mixed race, and then first cousins marrying. In our families, from my second great-grandmother's generation, no, really from my third great-grandparents, their children, if they have 5 kids, 4 are brown and 1 is white. If they have 3 kids, 2 are brown and 1 is white. 5 generations, that's what happens to every cousin's families and uncles and aunts. And then if a light person marries a light person, it's 3 light and 1 brown. Every generation. And I could see kind of where that came from. So it was amazing.
Did you find any documented cases, if not, maybe not documented cases, but cases in which people may have found more advantages by passing than they would that be?
What I have found is that most of them did not pass. There was an advantage in mobility and access by being very fair, and these people who came to Ohio, um, there were many other families, Normans, Harpers, Crosses, Stevens, Myers, but I was Calaman and Guy. And Moses Calaman's father was white and his mother was a mulatto. The father was born in 1746 and in Bourbon County, Kentucky, and came to Frederick County, Maryland. And James Guy's father was white and his mother was a mulatto. And so all of their children were these white looking people, some of whom chose to disappear into a white world. But they didn't really marry white people after that. You know, they married each other and then they married other families who had these similar histories, but they didn't really, I mean, there are always some black folks who marry white people and some white folks, but there's no inordinate amount of that. I have cousins whose families in Culpeper married white people to keep the families light skinned. I have my grandfather's grandmother was a Cheatham in Tennessee, and they were so attached to the white families that there was a lot of advantage to them, but none of them married any white people. They used the advantage that they had, but they didn't seek to extend it. So the Ohio people were like that. They were very proud, but it wasn't so important that you be light, that you be that you be industrious, that you be God-fearing, that you did what everyone else did, because we're trying to go somewhere and there's only one way to get there. So we don't carry anyone. You have to carry your load and yours. And that's what became kind of characteristic of these people. I have an aunt who is just, I'm not proud of my white heritage. I don't find any satisfaction. And it sounded like Archie Bunker, and I shared with her that, these people didn't seek white people to marry and to be, because that was no party either, being somewhere and having a mixed family, because they'll burn your house down. But you're already light, which I think a lot of white people thought, if you look kind of like you're white, then you're probably not going to stab me in an alley, And even today, if you're light-skinned with kind of whitish hair or white features, I think white people who would not accept someone who looks like Ice-T, they would accept you, or but we were not taught that we had anything anyone else didn't. So I'm because they were mixed, they were in the 1790 census schedules. They would not have been listed by name if they were not mixed. I have families on my father's side where my second great grandmother had 3 sons who were like my color, and then 5 daughters who were very white, and clearly the census taker marked them black and marked the sisters mulatto. So it was a lot of foolishness, but I think these people basically got on with their day with the advantage, but they didn't press it.
Would you find any interesting connections between the Underground Railroad and your family?
I don't really have an apparent Underground Railroad attachment other than as part of the histories of my people, because in modern media we seem to be relegated as a monolithic group that were all slaves, and so that's all you ever achieved or overcame. When the slaves who were in Tennessee, my mother's father's grands and greats, they were slaves of favor. They were green eyes with white hair, and they had a couple of white children in between their black marriages, but they were of favor. They were given land. Some of the children would go and stay at the plantations even after slavery. There was one where my great grandfather's brother, the oldest brother, was favored by one of his white uncles, and as a young man, he gave him a gun and told him, if anybody ever messes with you, pull out this gun. Well, then the uncle 2 weeks later goes to hit him, and he pulls out and he says, you said to use this to get you off my back. But but they were favored. They were favored, so they were not escaping. The the people from Maryland, in my father's people in Maryland, Somerset County, they were black as night with no white blood in them, but they were free from 1780, so they were not escaping. Probably the only connection would not have so much been Ohio as Maryland, because they lived in Harford County, which is right at the mouth of the Chesapeake, which was a Harriet Tubman crossing point out of Harford County, like 10 miles from where my mother grew up. And the tavern was owned actually by a Hilton relative. But
So they could have been agent on the,
they could have been agent on the transport
Yeah.
on the East Coast. And probably the closest connection I could think of in Ohio is that my great grandfather, James Dingus, who was born in Giles County, Virginia, but when his father died, his father was like a fourth black, but when he died, they moved to West Virginia because there were easier rules, and the miscegenation laws were not so adhered to. And when his father died, he was supposed to go to Hampton, but he couldn't because there were younger siblings. So he worked in the mines there, and then came to Marietta Academy. But that West Virginia to Ohio was part of the route, but they were not slaves. So
probably people assisting.
yes,
agents.
yes, they knew of it, I'm sure, and they knew of it, I'm sure, but there was no connection to them needing it that way.
Are there any closing comments that you'd like to offer? You'd like for us to, regarding your life?
I think the Ohio connection has really amazed me, because I had no idea that Ohio provided so much stability for my families and for black people. I grew up in New Jersey, and people on the East Coast, especially the Northeast, think that the whole world is right there and anything that ever happened there. But I think the overarching amazement comes from these families in 1780 and 90 and 1800 making decisions for 1900 and 2000 by moving their families to a place where they could be self-sufficient and safer than other places. And it fleshes in some of the holes that I've had in me, knowing that when I go into a bank, if I raise my voice at all, something I don't understand, there's a security guard standing behind me. Knowing that I have called the police on young white thugs who were threatening my household, and I was standing out front, and they put me in cuffs when they got there, thinking that I was who was waiting to be taken to jail. I think that it will help my sons and their sons. I'm finishing a book, I'm self-publishing a book on all of these 11 lines of my family and digressing. It's the Calaman Guideline and digressing to the men they married. And although they may not embrace that now, but I know that the sequence is that when you lose your parents or grandparents, that's when you want to ask. And so I'm hoping that it will provide them some safety and some security and some long-term esteem, knowing that they know who they are, since 1686 is the furthest back I go. And so that's what this is the culmination of. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate this.
Thank you.